The family of George Floyd has made an emotional appeal for justice as protests continue across the country despite curfews and threats of force. The mother of Floyd's daughter paid tribute to him, describing Floyd as a good man and emphasising the impact his killing will have on his child.
He will never see her grow up, graduate. He will never walk her down the aisle. If it's a problem she's having and she needs her dad, she does not have that anymore. I'm here for my baby. And I'm here for George because I want justice for him.
Well, Floyd's death has sparked days of protests, including in Washington, D.C. The US president has come under criticism for his handling of the tense situation, in particular, the forced removal of protesters outside the White House in order for Donald Trump to have a photo opportunity at a nearby church.
When peaceful protesters dispersed in order for a president from the doorstep of the people's house, the White House, using tear gas and flash grenades in order to stage a photo op in one of the most historic churches in the country, or at least in Washington, D.C. We can be forgiven for believing the president is more interested in power than in principle, more interested in serving the passions of his base than the needs of the people in his care.
Well, ministers, including those attached to the church that Trump visited, have also criticised the president, accusing him of using religion as props for his own political ends. And protests are continuing across the country. Curfews are in place in many cities to keep order. The protests have been mostly peaceful during the day, but nightfall has brought some looting and vandalism in certain areas. Well, we'll be talking to John Hendren in Minneapolis a little bit, but let's take you to some pictures from earlier in New York. We know that there were protests there during the day. And here we see protesters walking down Midtown. We had violence last night in Midtown. Hundreds of protesters were arrested. There was some vandalism and looting in Midtown. So that's the scene now live from New York. But let's just go back to Minneapolis for a second and talk to John Hendren. So, John, let's talk first then about that George Floyd family press conference in Minneapolis. It was tearful, it was poignant. So what more did the family have to say?
Well, Roxy Washington was the one who really did the most poignant speaking there, and she said that George Floyd has left a daughter who will never know her father. She'll never have him at her graduation, he'll never see her walk down the aisle. And she talked about justice for George Floyd, and his family's been very clear about what that is. His brother Terrence talked about this yesterday, and that is they want all four of the officers who arrested George Floyd to face charges. Now, one of them already has. Derek Chauvin is charged with third-degree murder and with manslaughter, but they want all four of those officers to be charged. And I just want to give you a little look around here, Darren, at the scene here. If you look back there, under those tents at that gas station, you can see that there are people speaking, a lot of listeners, and then there's been music here, there's food, there's been even dancing at points. Over here, there is a flower memorial that you can see where people have laid for him. And then here is the somber sight behind me. And that is where George Floyd spent his last moments. It was right in front of this Cup food store. And that is where the real memorial has been. You can see the newest addition over here is a George Floyd painting. But I want to introduce you to somebody. This is Akito Granberry, who lives here. 3 interesting facts about him. He was in the military. He's a fireman. And he knew Prince. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about why you're here.
I'm here because this is historic. This is a part of history. It's a part of our history. I think that Minnesota started a revolution across the country, and nobody expected. I've been talking about this for a year, that something like this was going to happen. I just didn't think it was going to start from Minnesota.
And And what are you? I mean, what are you hearing people say? Why are they still out in the streets now? After it's now been 8 days.
Well, if you live in this city and you know there's like a gray cloud over the city right now. People are so across the nation, right, with this COVID and everybody being in isolation and people are unemployed. And then to turn on the TV or be out here and to see something like that take place, that was the snapping point. That's all they needed that was the fuel to the fire, right? And instead of there's one officer being convicted, what happened to the other 3? And that's why everybody's out here. And if there was 4 on the department, then there's probably 4 to 8 more that you don't know about. They operate in the same sense, right? It's a private club that you join, and you're sworn into secrecy and not to betray your brother.
And as an African-American man here in Minnesota, do you feel like that could have been you?
I do. Despite my intelligence, despite my resume, despite my work ethic and my successes, I feel like that could have been me. That's somewhat been me. I've been pulled out of my car. And it's based off of what type of vehicle you're driving. If I drive my old winter beater, I'm harassed and pulled over. If I drive my newer Mercedes, and it shouldn't be that way. Can't judge a man based off of the car that he drives, Judge a man based off of the man, right?
So in a sense, you're here for George Floyd, but you're also here for whoever might be next, right?
George Floyd is me. He's a lot of minorities. He's a lot of oppressed people, not just minorities. People that are oppressed by the system. I can ask this generalized question. I can line up 10 men here of every nationality and ask them, do you get nervous when a cop car gets behind you? You even get nervous when a cop car gets behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And you got all the right credentials. I got all the right credentials, right? Because your safety and your life is in the hands of someone that could paint their own picture of you, despite your successes. And it shouldn't be that way.
And how long do you think this is going to happen? How long are you going to keep coming out here?
Until we get justice to all the officers involved, and all officers are like them, are held accountable.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you, Akito, for talking to us and walking us through all that. I'm sorry, we're not supposed to do that. I'll give you one of those. My apologies. But that's a poignant view from here. Really, and it's one I've heard from nearly every African-American young man I've talked to here, and that is each one of them feel that what happened to George Floyd could have happened to them.
And John, we know that Minnesota has filed a civil rights charge against the Minneapolis police over the death of George Floyd. What does this all mean, John?
Well, the governor has been keen to end these protests, and he said, I know that those protesters think that officials are not listening to them, and I want them to know that I am listening to them. We have filed discrimination charges against the Minnesota Police Department. What that does is it triggers an investigation. That investigation looks back 10 years into whether there has been systemic racism, specifically against African Americans, in the Minneapolis State Police Department. And meanwhile, he's seeking to make a voluntary agreement with the Minneapolis State Police to change their policies so it can be a more racially fair department.
All right, John Hendren, live for us there in Minneapolis. John, thank you for that. Let's cross over now to Washington, D.C. and talk to Shihab Rattansi. Shihab, so it seems the protesters, you were telling us earlier, have split into smaller groups tonight. Tell us where you are and what's happening now.
We're back outside the White House. They move in small groups, they walk around, the police follow them, then they come back. Some of them come back, some of them we understand may be heading towards the Capitol, but we're not really sure. But we're back. There's several hundred people now outside the White House once again. The difference this evening is in the topography is we now have this fence here, and then the security forces are all aligned behind that. In some ways, it sort of feels much more secure as a result, because as a result, the combat troops aren't just right next to us, pepper spraying us, kidnapping us, and so on. They're actually just sort of behind their lines. They're kept in their cage. They have come out every now and then and sprayed pepper spray through the fence, but they're back there, which is in some ways a bit more reassuring. You get the sense here, and I was just talking to some people, well, do you think Donald Trump he had his photo opportunity, he had his crackdown, and now maybe they'll allow this to be a peaceful site of protest, which is, I mean, the only reason it gets violent here is because the troops start attacking the protesters. And so that is the hope, but you never know. Just one other development to bring you. Mark Esper, the defense secretary, has given an interview where he says when he came out with Donald Trump to visit the church opposite the White House, he had no idea where he was going. In fact, Brad, I don't know if you can focus, he thought he was visiting this building here, which is a toilet in Lafayette Square, which has some graffiti on it. He says, well, as far as I was concerned, I was coming to see a bit of damage at the toilet in Lafayette Square. He says he had no idea he was going to the church. It's very interesting that he's distancing himself from that visit to the Church of St. John, which has caused so much controversy. Nothing that Joint Chiefs of Staff, though, he was here in full combat gear, and there's a lot of outrage about that. But let's talk to Sean Blackman very quickly. I'm very glad we've got Sean, because he's a veteran activist. He's been on so many protests here in D.C. about police brutality and getting justice. And I wonder, I mean, do you feel that there's something different here, or do you think everything will go back to normal once again in a few days?
Well, I would say that, the intensity of police repression that we've seen over the last few days, though not this evening, is unlike anything I've seen personally in Washington, D.C. in the last few years, having been organizing here. And in terms about whether or not people will forget, I think that depends on the extent to which people are organized. Ultimately, that's what will have to be the result of all of this effort. We've been seeing thousands and thousands of people take to the streets all across the country here in D.C., facing incredible repression, being gassed, being shot at with pellets and things like this. We had a whole scene in here in Washington, D.C. last night of people being trapped on the street and being gassed. Unfortunately, some people taking them into their homes. And so it's been an all-out systemic assault, I would say, on a protest here in D.C. And so, again, moving forward, the extent to which that can coalesce around a kind of organized thrust towards justice, I think will be key.
But what we've seen before is there's a difference between outrage at police brutality and an actual connecting of the dots between the police brutality and the economy and the Democratic Party. When you see people with Joe Biden T-shirts around here, I mean, it's Joe Biden who's the author of so much legislation that empowered the police in the first place. And he's contrite now, but he was boasting about it not so long ago. I mean, do you feel that people are connecting the dots, or is it now, oh, well, Trump is bad, he's the reason why this all, if Biden will improve things? I mean, is that what you're looking for? What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, certainly, the political spectrum out here runs the gamut. But you make an important point connecting the economy and economic issues with racist police terror. We're still very much in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic, and the United States government has completely abandoned its people. We've got 40-some-odd million people unemployed, all these different issues, and on top of all of that, we still have racist police terror happening. And so this is all flowing from the capitalist system, in my opinion. And so for me, it seems important to make that connection, not only to sort of get a better idea of who is responsible, but so that we can begin to ask serious questions about what kind of society and what kind of system do we want moving forward, seeing that the capitalist system is not solving our problems and, in fact, wasn't designed to do so.
Yeah, but then you're talking about a complete change of the entire American system. So, was that realistic? Is this a country based around the sort of system that has led in some ways to the protests that we're seeing today?
It'll be realistic when we make it real. The people of Cuba ask themselves the same question. The people of Venezuela, Vietnam, China asked themselves all the same question, Grenada, before they had their revolution to completely overchange their society. And so I think today we have to do what they did. We have to seize the time and, take charge of our own destiny and have the confidence that we can, in fact, change society. All it takes is the will to do it and the organization to carry it out properly.
Sean Blackman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will remain here. It's a nice equilibrium. You would just hope that maybe it'll stay. This is obviously vigorous protest. It's a very solid fence, though. It's this flexibility is a good thing. It means you can handle a certain amount of a beating. There's no way it's coming up either. So although we have all the troops over on that side, they're not coming through this way. So we'll have to see. They have to go around if they want to clear us out. We'll be here.
All right, Shihab, we'll no doubt come back to you later on throughout the night. Shihab, let's leave it there for now. Police in New York have begun making arrests after the city's curfew came into effect. Thousands of people remained on the streets despite an early curfew. People are being ordered to go home. In the last few days, there's been some looting and vandalism in the nighttime. The curfew is set to remain in place until Sunday. But the state governor, Andrew Cuomo, has criticised New York City's response to the protest. He said the police there haven't done enough to stop looting and vandalism. Cuomo has offered to send the National Guard to help restore order.
The NYPD and the mayor did not do their job last night. I believe that. Second, you have 38,000 NYPD people. It is the largest police department in the United States of America. Use 38,000 people and protect property. Use the police, protect property and people. Look at the videos. It was a disgrace.
But the city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, says deploying the National Guard would only heighten tensions.
We do not need, nor do we think it's wise for the National Guard to be in New York City, nor any armed forces. I'm going to tell you why. This is really important we have this out right now. If someone needs a history lesson, when outside armed forces go into communities, no good comes of it.
Well, Gabriel Elizondo is in New York, where police are trying to enforce the curfew.
It started as a peaceful protest, but things have taken a turn for the worst. We've seen some looting. They've got a gentleman in custody over there. The police have just shown up here in force right now as another night of chaos here in New York City. There are groups. Apparently we're looting Chase Bank down the street here. Again, the curfew is in effect right now. And we saw a group of about 20 to 30 break off. And there was started to be some looting here. And then the police have responded. This is what we've seen all night. Groups of looters that are breaking off from the peaceful protests and then start some sort of looting. And then within usually 5 minutes, you see a huge police presence descend on the scene. And that's exactly what we're seeing right here, right now.
Well, in the last few hours, a curfew has come into effect in Los Angeles. Ahead of the go-home order, protesters were still out on the streets, although in fewer numbers than earlier in the day. More than 2,700 of them have been arrested in the city since the protest began, nearly all of them for curfew violations or refusing to disperse. So let's cross over to the West Coast now and talk to Rob Reynolds there in Los Angeles. Rob, so things seem to have calmed down there for now. Tell us what's been happening on the streets around you.
Well, there have been huge protests, Darren, peaceful protests, marching, people chanting, of course, that Black Lives Matter, justice for Daryl Floyd and for George Floyd, excuse me, and for others who have lost their lives during encounters with the police. But now it seems to be very, very quiet. You can see police are behind me, but I think that's a good thing that people are actually adhering to the curfew, again, in a very peaceful manner. It's interesting, I know you were talking at length to Shihab about the trip that President Trump took to that historic church in Lafayette Square yesterday for the purposes of a photo op and to hold up a Bible. Well, an interesting response to that from a group of faith leaders here in Los Angeles who on Wednesday, leaders from a variety of religious traditions are going to gather at a church in Santa Monica to hold their own protest meeting and to gather to discuss the situation. And Rabbi Neil Comas-Daniels, who organized the event, said, quote, "The president's attempt to hijack the spiritual richness of America cannot go unanswered." And he also said that they hope by this gathering of faith leaders to show what a real response, spiritual response that is, to racial injustice looks like. Now I'm joined by Coleman, who is here and has been protesting today. And Coleman, we don't want to keep you too late because we know it's curfew time, so we deeply appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Now I understand you're actually in town visiting friends, and you felt that it was very important, even though you're sort of on vacation, to come out and take part. Tell me why.
Yes, sir. I just didn't feel it's right staying inside. As a black man, while all this is going on. You know, I've been told since I was a child, you know, you respect the police, you know, you always, you know, show respect to others. But at the same time, what we're seeing is, you know, we can literally do nothing, and we're still going to be killed for it. So I just felt I need to come out here and have my voice heard and be a part of the movement.
What would be that sign that would convince yourself and the thousands and tens, hundreds of thousands perhaps of people who are demonstrating around the country that their point has been taken and that something is going to change? What would that look like to you?
It's going to take a real change. They're going to have to change the way that they operate their day-to-day operations. They're going to have to go through and talk to the officers that are already currently employed and retrain, because obviously something's wrong in the way they're being put out, because it happens way too frequently from our.
And does it go beyond just, you know, police tactics and training? Is there a much broader change that is due in the United States?
Absolutely, absolutely. We need to acknowledge that there's an issue here, and that there needs to be a change, first of all.
But the first step is acknowledging.
Because right now it's not being acknowledged. You know, every time we have a movement, we're met with another opposing movement. All Black Lives Matter, of course, but then we have the All Lives Matter movement, and we never said all lives didn't matter. All lives matter. You know, I'm a Christian man. I love everybody, but everyone is not being oppressed right now. It's Black people. It is people of color, and that's the issue here.
As a self-described Christian man, what was your reaction when you saw President Trump having ordered the square cleared by police to go and stand in front of that church and hold up a Bible?
I didn't. You know, it hurt. You know, I didn't agree with that. I think it was almost dismissing the movement, almost dismissing it. You know, and not acknowledging that we have voices out here, and we just want to be heard at the end of the day. That's all we're looking for. We just want to be heard. And we try to do it peacefully, and that's not welcomed either. You know, we try to take a knee. People don't like that. You know, so what else can we do? You know, we're hands tied, you know. I don't know what to do.
Holman, thank you very much for speaking with us. I know you want to get back to where you're staying before the curfew really kicks in. So thanks very much again, and best of luck to you, and stay safe. Okay. So, Darren, again, very few people out on the streets of Hollywood here. We heard also that there was a major gathering of protesters at the home of Mayor Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. That, again, was peaceful. I have to say, of course, as night falls, things sometimes do change. You mentioned the number of arrests that have occurred. There is a curfew in place, and so we will see what happens as the night goes on. But so far, it looks peaceful. Darren, back to you.
Rob, just stay with us for a second, because I wanted to show our viewers some pictures of the police coming out in force in another part of Hollywood. We're seeing pictures of a police cruiser or a number of police vehicles with officers milling around. You've been covering Hollywood most of the day today. I'm not sure where this is in relation to you, but what could be happening there? I mean, there are quite a lot of police vehicles in the street.
What tends to happen is if there are significant groups of people who are disregarding the curfew, or if there are people who are, breaking the law by trying to take things from stores or something, police will race to that location and then strategically place themselves in the streets and alleys surrounding that area, and then sort of move in. And as people scatter and run, they are then intercepted in the streets and alleys. I don't know exactly what you're seeing there, but that is certainly not atypical. We just heard a bunch of police cars go by not long ago, so maybe they were heading in that direction. But it's kind of a cat and mouse type of situation. If some trouble starts somewhere, or if there's a large group, the police are going to just enforce the curfew, and they are not going to allow those people to congregate. If there are people breaking into stores and things of that nature, likewise, the police are going to take action. So we'll certainly try to find out more about what you're seeing there. Hopefully this incident that you're seeing is not going to end with anyone getting hurt.
All right, Rob Reynolds there live for us in Hollywood. Rob, thank you for that.